Hey everyone, I'm Cameron Betuzzi, and you're watching the 16th video in a playlist of videos responding to 20 arguments against God's existence.
Science explains so much of what we used to attribute to a God.
Here's my question. What follows from that? It doesn't follow that God doesn't exist. To reason that way is actually to commit the logical fallacy of composition. Just because science has explained things in the universe, in other words, parts of the universe, it doesn't follow that science is going to explain the whole universe. This would be basically like arguing that every part of an elephant is light in weight, therefore the whole elephant is light in weight. Now, sometimes reasoning from parts to wholes is legitimate. One can definitely legitimately reason that if every brick is red, then the whole wall of bricks will be red. The problem here is that explanations are not like color. So let me explain that real quick. Every now and then I make my wife and I gourmet sandwiches, like legit gourmet. All of the ingredients in the sandwich have their own place of origin, right? The bread is made in a bread factory, the meat comes from an animal, the lettuce comes from a farm. But do the explanations of the ingredients by themselves explain the whole sandwich? Not at all. I'm the one that created the sandwich. Unless you're an atheist, you're probably not going to think that the ingredients just sort of landed on the plate by chance. So similarly, even if every part of the universe has a scientific cause, it doesn't follow that the whole universe will have a scientific cause. That's actually to commit the fallacy of composition. Before I get too hungry, there's actually a deeper, more serious problem with this argument, and that it relies on a very controversial interpretation of probability, namely frequentism. And this is a little technical, so just bear with me for a moment. Frequentism says that the probability of an attribute A in a finite reference class B is the relative frequency of actual occurrences of A within B. And so here's what that means in English. The probability that A will occur is determined by how many times A has happened in the past. So for example, if I flip a coin, and it lands on heads 50 out of 100 times, the probability that the same coin will land heads the next time is 50%. Sounds pretty reasonable, right? Well, let's take a closer look at this. Suppose I have two coins now, a penny and a quarter. On frequentism, I know that if I flip the penny again, there's a 50% chance that it'll land on heads. But what about the quarter? Well, I haven't actually flipped the quarter yet. So if we change the reference class to quarters, and suppose that no one else has ever flipped a quarter, what's the probability that I land on heads? Well, on frequentism, if you have no previous trials, the answer is either 0 or 1. In the literature, this is called the reference class problem for frequentism. The more detailed we get with our reference class, the less trials we have to work with, and the more generalized our probability becomes. And this is actually really counterintuitive, right? It seems like we can just base on the nature of this thing that it's going to be a 50-50 chance that I land on heads, even if no one has ever flipped a quarter before. Moreover, it seems like the more information that we include, the more accurate our probability should be. It shouldn't work the other way. And this is part of the reason why probability theorists have opted for different interpretations of probability, like Bayesianism, that don't rely on frequencies. Now, let's think back to the original argument. The argument is that science explains so much inside the universe at a high frequency. But if we don't adopt frequentism, does it follow that God doesn't exist or that God probably doesn't exist? No. Last thing to note is that this actually is not an argument against Christianity, it's an argument against naturalism. Christianity predicts a largely stable universe. Now, obviously, the Bible contains miracles, but these happen at very rare moments in the story. They're rare because God gave humans moral responsibility. And the only way we can actually be responsible for our actions is if we can predict the consequences of our actions. And this requires a stable, orderly universe. Well, what reason is there, and think about this, what reason is there to expect an orderly universe like ours on naturalism? There is none. There's infinitely more ways the universe could be chaotic than orderly. So the fact that we find regularity in nature at all is actually evidence for Christianity and evidence against naturalism. So this argument completely bites atheism in the foot. To summarize, this reasoning actually commits the fallacy of composition. Just because parts of the universe have natural causes doesn't mean that the whole universe has natural causes. Secondly, we saw that this argument relies on a very controversial interpretation of probability, namely frequentism, which can be and probably should be rejected. Lastly, since there's no reason at all to expect an orderly universe on naturalism, this observation actually confirms Christianity and disconfirms naturalism.